All right, all right. Some days are more yellow submariney than others, and this is a very, very yellow submariney day. Good Lord. When I went out this morning, I passed a woman coming into the building, and she said, "This is just wretched. It's just horrid." I was like, "Wow, okay." And so I thought, okay, it's raining, yeah. All right, and so I was. I find hoods, rain hoods are they're great. I mean, they're terrific. They do the job, but at the same time, you can't bloody well see anything, and you get to the corner, the corner of a street, and you gotta like turn. You turn to look at the side of your hood, and you're like, "Thanks for that," and it's all wet inside and gross. Anyway, so I often take my hood off and walk along. I'm just gonna get wet. It's okay. After living in Vancouver for a couple of years, you're just like, I'm going to get wet. That's all right. But the rain in Vancouver is generally, unless it's in the middle of the winter, it can be steady. It can be quite heavy, but it's usually reasonably warm. It's not usually that cold. As I say, in the winter, it can be cold. And because it's damp, it can be, ugh, you're like, ugh, you just don't get warm. So that's tough. But anyway, so I was like, I'll take my hood off. So I walked along, and after a couple of blocks, I was like, "This is terrible. This is wretched." I put up my hood. Our my initial perception of, like, oh, she must be crazy. And then after a couple of blocks, I'm like, not so crazy. Oh dear. Oh. Yes, I have a crowdsourced question for you all. I think I know the two people who can solve this. So a special shout out goes to two of my dear friends. One of whom I think gave us this figure. Oops, it went right above the world. Jeez. Okay, you can see this character here. She's quite the thing. She's this wonderful sort of babushka character. She's quite pissed. She's like, yeah. I sort of think of her as, I'm not sure why I think of her as a Russian. She's sort of a working person type, and she's obviously had it with whatever it is. She's had it with it. Anyway, so I think a younger friend of mine gave this to me a couple of years ago. I think maybe 10 years ago, which passes for a couple of years. You get to be my age, it's a couple of years ago. It's like, that was 2010, Tim. I'm like, that's what I said, a couple of years ago. Anyway, so she's great. But there's no markings on her. There's nothing on the base. So I think she was part of a group, a series of these sort of sort of rebellious characters, and this apparently was one of the desirable ones. I certainly think she's great. So she's been sitting on the side table underneath a light for years, and on that day we were sitting there, looking around the room at the things you don't normally see because they've been there for so long. And Gilda said, "What is that?" And I was like, which of the that's might that be? Because there's a lot of, as you can imagine, looking at my back shelves here, there's a lot of that around. It's like, not that, the other that. So I said, oh, that's one of those characters. And then I went into this sort of story, and she was like, no, I have no memory of that whatsoever. And I was like, yeah, okay, let me look these up. So, I got out the old Book of Noan, the Acer Book of Noan. It's always somebody's Book of Noan. And nothing on the web. So I took a picture of it. It took two of us to get a picture of it because I put a white scrim behind it so we could get a good clear picture. Uploaded it to Google Images, and no, and except there were I got 57,000 images of little toys with their hands up. So it was like everything from, like Hulk Hogan to, that one of the wrestlers that has the sort of, well, they all have those luchadores masks, right? Luchadores, I think it's luchadores, but do they say maybe luchadores? I don't know Spanish. And so, but yeah, so the wrestlers and the different Marvel figures, and then the He-Ra, with all the disgusting muscles. Like, you could turn them this way, turn them that way. They're like this square. They have this like square for a torso. Oh, they're so grotesque. That's part of their charm, obviously, is their grotesquerie. Oh dear. No hits. I couldn't believe it. Google, let me down. They're too busy taking over the world. It's like Pinky and the Brain. What are we going to do tomorrow, Pinky? What we always do, Brain. Try to take over the world. So, anyway, but if you have any information on our little enraged peasant here, please send it. Yeah, extra marks. Extra marks. I won't give this away. This is now a treasured object. There's a little shrine around it. So there's a shrine made of like pots and pans and workers' objects. I came across another movie I was going to talk about, and called The Fall, and I will talk about it. You can see it's another movie that I haven't opened. Not only have I not opened it, but I was peeling this off because it was ugly, and it's 3 for $10. And so why didn't I just peel it off and throw it away? Well, because so you can see what I paid for this, right? It was 3 for $10. I probably found 3. I might have even taken 3 copies of this. Like, that's how crazy it is to be. When you love a thing, you're like, I'll get 3 copies and I'll give them to my friend. Like, what the hell? $3, right? So 3 for $10. Well, I remember exactly where I got this. I got this in a Loblaws dump bin. I was at, whoops, I put it right in the middle of this beautiful design. And 3 for $10. I should make that my new motto. 3 for $10. We should have a course called 3 for $10. That'd be great, eh? It's like, how much does it cost to get in this course? 3 for $10. How many are you taking? Anyway, yeah, I was in Loblaws and shopping, food shopping. It's like you're glad there's food there. It's like, yay, I can get food. This is great. I'll be able to eat for another week. Yay, it's terrific, and you can get the food you want. Ideally, and and it's in good shape. I mean, the produce is in good shape, and you're like, cheese, excellent, and crackers, yay, this is the best. Crackers and cheese, fantastic. Make a salad for supper, fantastic. When I say make a salad for supper, I don't mean that's all you have is salad. I mean, you have a salad, and then you have crackers and cheese. And it's extremely wonderful. Lots of hot tea. And it's just great. It's like, anyway. So, yeah, so I was in a dump. I was at Loblaws shopping. Okay, so I finished shopping. I was like, oh, so I was going out. And this is one of those mega Loblaws. So you go in and you feel like you're going to lose your brains because basically that's just like no human being was ever designed. It's almost as big as the Veld. Actually, maybe we were designed. The evolutionary plan was for us to be able to hunt in Loblaws. Jesus. But they're just inhuman places. And, as I come out, I'm like, aha, something. And so there's those wire racks, wire bins, and they just have thrown, deep. Well, they used to do this. They don't do it anymore. And one day am I expecting to arrive at those? There'll be wire racks and be like, your choice, cell phone for only $3 for $9.99. So people would be going pawing through them, looking for an iPhone. Yeah. Or I'd be looking for a BlackBerry. Oh, I miss my BlackBerry. These phones are good now and all this, but I loved the BlackBerries. Oh, they were great. They had a hard keyboard. And they were just, they were nice little, they were I don't know. There was just something about them. Yeah, BlackBerries. You can still get them, but they don't run anything. It's like they'll contact Turkey. that's where they make contact. Anyway, so I stopped. Well, I always stopped. And I'm like, oh, DVDs for $3.99, 3 for $10. And I'd be going through them, raking over the, Judd Apatow comedies and things with Ben Stiller in them, and every Will Ferrell, Chris Farley comedy you never saw and didn't want to see ever, even for $3.99, and all those kinds of things. Anyway, so in there I found The Fall, and in the end I couldn't pass it up. Like I went past the bin any number of times. I kept seeing it, and I thought I'm going to get that because I can't even duplicated disc to give to somebody else for $3.99, and then this is. So actually, that's not true. I could duplicate a disc for anyway. So this is an amazing movie, and I will talk about this. You can see it, and the reason it's a figure ground relationship, right? So it's this is a typical sort of the surrealists were always playing with this Magritte, and so it's a sort of Magritte Dali kind of cover where the ground, which is the desert, and the mountains in the back. That's the ground, and the figure is made by the shape of the ground, so that your eye pops back and forth between seeing the ground and seeing the figure. Although in this case, because it was a poster for a movie and they wanted to make sure that people got the point, they made it kind of hard to get around the fact that one of the birds makes the nose, and there's this a flower. I don't know if you can see it, but a flower makes the mouth, and so on. But it really is. It's a beautiful evocation of the film. Anyway, I'm going back to Night Moves, which is like you saw this. I flashed this before your camera eyes. I don't know, 5, 6, 8 days, 10, 12, 14 days ago. So going, can I do it here 16? And I talked about what was a classic. I got into that instead. Okay, the reason I want to talk about this movie is that it's like from 1974, I think. 75, yeah. And it was, when I was a teen, this movie was considered to be sort of the height of sophistication, and the conversation. But this was rated R at the time. I mean, now it'd be rated PG. Actually, it wouldn't even be PG. It would be like, gee, you could show this to a 3-year-old. Because there's breasts. Oh, no, not that. Like half the population has breasts and has seen them. And the other half of the population probably, well, of that the other half of the population that doesn't have breasts, well, has their own version, which are flatter, right? And has seen those. And some part of that population nursed at them, but oh no, breasts, because we've busy fetishizing everything and turning the body into a place you can sell or make into power. Anyway, yeah, so there's breasts in it. So there's a very young Melanie Griffith in it, and she was like, I don't know, she looks like she's 13. She probably was 16 because she's got that young-looking face. So it's a private eye movie. Like, it's interesting how many of these sort of, why do I keep choosing these sort of private eye movies or books? And I think it's because there's a certain steadiness about them. Where the hero is reliable. You can rely on the hero. Their moral compass is secure. They know what they're doing. And even if they're in trouble, they still are in charge. They're prepared to take charge. Even if they don't know all the answers, they're prepared to essentially be the adult. And that, I think, is very interesting. And in some cases, like the Chandler case, with Farewell, My Lovely, or The Long Goodbye, or The Little Sister, clearly Chandler had a very particular picture for Marlowe, and the piece of the essay I read to you from The Simple Art of Murder, where he says, this is, he is not the best man or but he is a good man, and down these mean streets a man must go, and so on. And I think there's that quality to the private eye, whether or not they're male or female doesn't matter at all. It's the person, the persona of the private eye is the person who knows and who understands. And also is a philosopher. Fundamentally, they take a sort of philosophical attitude towards life. They're watching the passing parade with at a distance, and so there's a sense of sort of, one of the things I really enjoy about them is the sense of humor, and there's sort of this dry, mordant wit, where they get the joke, they're in on the joke basically, and they know they're part of it. They're not holier than thou. They're part of the parade. They're part of the story, which is why a film I mentioned a long time ago now, Paprika, is similarly interesting because Paprika is the screen character of this psychiatrist who goes into people's dreams, their virtual dreams, right? And she handles things. She just is used to handling disaster, like that's her, and it doesn't throw her. That I find very interesting and reassuring. So it's interesting how often I'm suggesting these sort of texts where there's an anti-hero of some kind, not even necessarily a hero, maybe just a protagonist. Anyway, so in this case, and there's a puzzle to be solved, and the way that they're going to solve the puzzle is by reflecting on who is who, not what people have done, but who they are, so that this produces the outcome, which is the crime or the series of overlapping crimes. And at the moment we're just finishing, unfortunately, we're getting near the end of watching a series called Border Town, which is on Netflix. And we saw the first episode or season of this a couple of years ago on something else, I think. Anyway, Netflix then apparently has released the next couple of seasons, and I can't recommend this highly enough. You have to have a real fondness for the Finns, and I do. They're just so apparently, they're sort of Teutonic. They don't discuss, and they don't. But actually, they're very passionate. They're very passionate people, and they discuss lots of things. So they just have these short bursts of information exchange. But Border Town, so the main character is a policeman, and he has a memory palace, which is of interest to me. I'm interested in memory. So the way he solves things is he breaks things up into his memory palace, and which is a technique that, anyway, you probably don't want to hear about that. But he's a very interesting character, and it's but he has this wonderful dry, sense of humor. So in this story, the reason I was talking about Border Town was that it was one of those loops that almost didn't get closed, and then it got closed at the last minute. But he basically, at one point, he's being threatened by a couple of guys who wanted to solve a crime, and he says, "I need to know about this and this," and they're like, why would you need to know about that stuff to figure out where these people are who have gone missing? And he says, if I know what they were doing, I know where they are. And this is fundamentally the mindset of most procedural detective stories, the best ones anyway. It's not just a matter of the mechanics, it's a matter of when you come to understand the person, then you understand what they will do next because you can anticipate them. And that's, sort of the point that's why Crime and Punishment, considered to be the first sort of murder. It's not the first detective story, because it certainly is not, but it's considered to be sort of the first thriller, essentially, because Raskolnikov is caught up in the pursuit, and the pursuit is also existential. Well, all pursuits are existential, basically. Whether you're sorting mail or ironing clothes or writing a book, the pursuit of the thing is existential. Are you waiting for it to be over? What is the meaning of the thing, and so on? No particular thing has more meaning than any other particular thing if you take it in that absolute moment. It's all the moments linked up together that makes a narrative out of it, or we make narratives. They don't actually make a narrative, but we make a narrative out of them. We're like, oh, this is the way this looks. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. So in this case, our main guy, this is just, I unwrapped it, but it's still reflected, right? But anyway, you can see, so this is a very young Gene Hackman, and there's Gene Hackman again on his ID card. There's the plane, and this is the naked body. So here's the naked Melanie Griffith with her blonde hair, and she's supposed to be wearing a diver's mask. And the breasts and the nipples especially have been carefully blended out there, so you just in case you are going to be, driven to thought crime by oh no, nipples. Oh my god. Anyway, so at the time when this came out, it was sort of like the adults were seeing this movie. I wanted to see it, and I couldn't see it. It was restricted, and it says so on the back here. It says, "Look, it says R right there. See, it says R restricted. You cannot see it." It says this DVD. Anyway, it's just restricted. I'm telling you right now, you're not allowed to see it. Nobody is allowed to see this movie, especially because this one is still shrink wrapped or. Anyway, so I wanted to see it. Well, eventually it came around. It came around on the circuit of repertory theaters. There were many, many repertory cinemas in Toronto. There were about five running at the height of the sort of that time, so late 70s. This was the way you saw older films. There were no VCRs. The VCR movement began to kill those theaters off, but not for quite a long time. So at any given time in Toronto, you could see, every night, you had a choice of basically 10 movies you could go and see. And it wasn't just one movie you're going to go and see. You're going to see two movies for like $3. Or if you went to the Roxy, 99 cents. Even for us, the Roxy was too much because people were smoking so much weed. It was like, oh my God, you had to sit to the back of the theater because the smoke tended to hang just down at the front of the theater. Jeez. And anybody who ventured near the 15th row would get an immediate contact high, pass out, and wake up and need food. It was like, oh, we were like, no, we're not going to the Roxy. These are 15 and 16-year-old kids, like we were, me and my friends. I had one friend particularly that I went with, or I just go alone. And that's a lot of fun too, actually. And nobody cared. They were like, "Hey, you're 15, okay, fine, student rate." Yeah. So you get in to see two restricted movies. They were like, "Yeah," they were all hippies. They were like, "Yeah, of course, come in. Do you want some weed?" It's like, "No, thanks. I don't want a headache." Well, that was it. Here were these two 15 or 16-year-old kids who were going to the movies. And we're like, "Oh, not another headache." We weren't 30. We were 15. Oh, come in. So I say, do you want to go to the blah, 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 what's playing? It's like, well, Jules et Jim and, I don't know, one of the Douanel story, the Truffaut, two Truffaut movies at the Roxy. And Stephen would say, oh, Christ, not the Roxy. I'll get a headache. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Let's go somewhere else. Go to the Cinema Lumiere. They didn't allow smoking inside. And, it cost $2.50, though. Ouch. So I went to see it in the review that way. And it was indeed an adult film. And it was an adult film not because there was sex in it, because there really isn't, my memory is there isn't actually any sex in it. There are breasts. But it's about loss, and it's about what life is, basically. So it was perfect for us. We were 16. I was like, yeah. Well, the thing is, one of those films that I was 16 or 17, something like that. Well, okay, so that stuff typically doesn't last. Then you see it again when you're like, oh, this is the best movie, and you drag all your friends to see it, or you get it on video or whatever, and you're like, oh, sorry guys, and they're like, oh, that's the last time we're listening to you, Lackmore. That joke going around. Oops. It's not a joke really. It's one of those. It's like a meme on Twitter or whatever. But so it's. People having a discussion about it's a Twitter feed, yeah. So I guess there's a little discussion. There's a little sort of inset discussion, discussion. So the first person says, let me explain to you about the greatness of Christ. Who at the age of 33 was betrayed by his 12 friends. After he'd produced the miracle of the loaves and the fishes, and the person listening says, stop, wait a second. Do you expect me to believe that? Do you expect me to believe at the age of 33, a man has 12 friends? It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. At the time you're 33, you got 5 friends because you don't have time for 12 friends. Are you kidding? And when you're like, I don't know, 18 or 19, you got 90 of your closest friends. By the time you're 30, you have 3. And it's like, yeah, that's more like it, So, and you get an extra friend in case one of them dies. Like you see, people start dying. You're like, shit, better get an extra friend. So you add somebody to the to the flock. You're like, you're my backup friend, just in case. I won't call you all the time, but I'll call you occasionally. And if one of my main friends dies, you're on deck. Oh, jeez. Say it ain't so, Joe. Mm. Anyway, so yeah, you and your closest 12 friends. So what the hell was I talking about? Yeah, that's right. So your 12 friends. That's right. Who you told this is the best movie. And well, actually, so and then I don't know, in my mid 20s, and I saw it again, and I was like, that is an excellent film. I was like, okay, so at the point that you're in your mid 20s, probably your taste is going to last a little bit longer. You're like, yeah, I'm good, I'm good. So then I was in my 30s. I'm like, let's see Night Moves again. So a friend and I saw it, and we were like, man, that's a great movie. It's like, okay, when you pass a certain point, you're like, this is now going to be like one of the best movies of all time. And I believe that, about 2001. For me, that's how 2001 works. For some people, they can't stand it. It's boring, it's tedious, they don't get it. That's fine, no problem. I'm not asking you to just leave. Don't come into my house. You're not allowed here. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But not, no, just kidding. I think my sister, I think 2001 drives her nuts. And as I say, I get it. I mean, I just don't, I don't put it on when she's around. I think 2001 is one of those movies that I put on anyway. I'm like, oh, it's like Runaway Train. I'm like, zoning out is part of the practice. It's part of what I expect. Anyhow, so Night Moves is one of those films that stands the test of time for me, even though it's a period piece, even though it's now, a film that was made 45 years ago. So the main character, the Gene Hackman character, who is a very steady. I mean, he's an American leading man. At that time, he was probably at the height of his. Between there and sort of 75 to 85, he was probably at the height of his popularity. But he was a very famous actor, and he still is alive. And he kept on acting in good things. He almost always, the things that he was in they were such a pleasure to see just because of him. So The Conversation was probably his most famous film, where he plays Harry Caul, Caul. Both meanings of the word there are important. And I'll talk about The Conversation. It's an amazing movie. And it's a classic for MIT. Like, I have to have seen The Conversation. People are like, you're in media studies, seen The Conversation? You're like, I need to. It's like, now is the time. Now is the time. So he's in a number of sort of very serious films like that. He actually does comedy occasionally. I find that, as I say, comedy for me is hit and miss. He then sort of is in a kind of The Conversation, sort of a kind of a weird sequel to it, in the sense that it's the same ideas, with Will Smith, called Enemy of the State, which is a favorite of mine because Tony Scott directed it again, Ridley Scott's brother. I have, again, a soft spot in my heart for Tony Scott. I think he's a good natural director, and he has an excellent sense of technology. He's really very good with tools. He's very good with big pieces of technology, small pieces of technology. So he does a sort of version of Runaway Train called Unstoppable. He directed Man on Fire with Denzel Washington. He often actually had worked with Denzel Washington. Unstoppable is actually another good Denzel Washington role, and it's interesting how Scott used these steady sort of leading men who were not Tom Cruise. They are recognizable as the heroes from the Raymond Chandler Mean Streets, basically. So he's a private eye, and his marriage is on the rocks. They live in L.A., and, well, I don't know California well enough to know like what part of, like, whether they actually live in L.A. Probably not, because they actually have a beach house. And at the time, everybody cool was living on the beach. So they've got this beautiful house, and it looks right out onto the beach. Oh, and there's this fascinating thing there's a sliding door. This is sort of the dream. The dream of the 70s was to live right on the beach and live a contemplative life, and don't get hooked up in objects, possessions, and not don't get burdened by your material possessions and so on. That was the first time America tried that. It didn't really work, but it was a good try. You got to give them credit for trying, and I do give them credit for trying. And yeah. Anyway, like that's where I won't start. Thereby hangs a tale, as the saying goes. You can look that one up too. It's a really interesting. The genesis of the phrase "thereby hangs a tale" is really clever. It's really cute. Um, anyway, so he's a private detective, and but as I say, his marriage is on the rocks. He's married to Susan Clark. That's right, who is an atypical. Well, she was typical of women. This is interesting, right? She's typical of women in the late '60s, early '70s, which means that she was not, she was a normal-looking woman. And this is some of the things about the. If you look at the female heroes, the heroines. I don't really like to use heroines, but anyway, because I think heroes. Anyway, okay. But if you look at Jane Fonda, not the very very young Jane Fonda, but sort of the Jane Fonda who was like in her 30s. Not Barbarella Jane Fonda. It's like, oh my God, please, let's not start that, But and Karen Black, Susan Clark was Candy Clark as well, Natalie Wood. They were attractive women, but they weren't bombshells. They didn't look like they hadn't had all this plastic work done, and they were normal looking women. They had normal breasts, and they had they weren't pneumatic. Petite women had small breasts. They were small chests, and they wore normal clothes, and they were interesting because they were people. So there's an interesting thing about if you look at, say, Steelyard Blues, Easy Rider. Well, okay, not so much Easy Rider because that's a crazy Dennis Hopper movie, but so some of the Clute, some of the sort of famous films that have women, Jill Clayburgh, who have women stars basically. Even Glenda Jackson, believe it or not, who was such a fine actor, and she still is. I gather she just played King Lear. That must have been amazing. Oh my God. Yeah, it's incredible. So there was a very, they seemed very real, and they seemed very tangible and very, I don't know, they weren't stars, they were just actors. They were, it's a concept. It's just about anything made by Robert Altman. So if you look at, say, MASH, or McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Julie Christie. Now, Julie Christie is this beautiful, gorgeous, this very fine bone structure and these fine bones and fine nose. And, it's there's a particular sort of Nordic facial structure there, which you can see people going nuts for. But otherwise, a lot of the women were, as far as I was concerned, sort of, they looked like the women who were in my life around me, in the sense that there was not. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons I really like this movie. And so, ironically, the politics of this film are going to be better than the politics of something from, say, 20 years ago. Because the politics of a film from 20 years ago are terrible. I mean, they're awful. That's when the women were saying, "Oh, we're not saying we're feminists because we don't hate men." It's like, oh, for Christ's sakes, Jesus, will you read a book? It's like, oh, and then idiots like Shailene Woodley would come on and say, "Oh, I like men. I'm not a feminist." Like, oh, you just set the whole world of feminism back 90,000 years. Thanks for that, Shailene, because now you don't have to live in the world because you just made $10 million or whatever, making a movie, and you're going to make 2 more movies and make more money than anybody has a right to need, and then for the rest of their 3 lifetimes, by 3, how many lifetimes do you have? 3, 3 for 3 for 10, 3 for 10. 3 for 10, yeah, 3 for 10 lifetimes. This increasingly is going to be my new motto: 3 for 10. Anyway, so it's not a bad idea to look back. Like, I'll talk about Chinatown, for instance, which is okay, directed by Roman Polanski, and that's a huge problem because Roman Polanski seems to be, as far as everybody can tell, it seems to have been a rapist, is a rapist because it doesn't stop being a rapist. At the same time, Roman Polanski made some very fine films. So what are you going to do about that? It's like, well, it's a struggle. Anyway, so in this case, he's hired by a mother who is very wealthy, like from the Hollywood super wealthy, basically, to find a daughter, and the daughter has gone on the lam because the family is too wealthy, and so there is these. This now is a very familiar story, where it's like, of course, the daughter ran away. And it's like, the family has too much money. They're ludicrously rich, blah blah blah. But at the time, it was like the way that super wealthy. There really weren't that many super wealthy, and you didn't see them. They didn't make movies about them, nor you saw occasional films anyway. So he's put on the track of this, and he sort of asks around at the studio because the wife is the disenfranchised, and a lot of the film is about this betrayal. So the wife is the either divorced or disenfranchised or somehow separated, or I think wife of a studio head. So he's fantastically wealthy. She lives in this huge mansion. She lives alone. The girl, Melanie Griffith, goes on the run. She's 16, I think. So he starts asking around the movie studio, like, well, what happened? And everybody knows him, like, hey, Harry, how's it going? And he's sort of this private eye. He's a gumshoe, as they used to call him. And so people wearing crepe-soled shoes. So in other words, not office shoes, right? Because the reason you wear a gumshoe, it's actually a thing, right? So if you wore leather shoes with leather soles, you were going to the office because you were walking around, in dress work shoes, good work shoes, which were not particularly about saving your feet from the cold and wet and so on. You were there to look good or to look professional and so on. But if you're out walking around in the city, tracing after people, you wore crepe sole shoes because crepe soles were like like a running shoe, bouncy. Give you comfort. So you were wearing gum sole shoes, and they really were. Actually, they were gummy. And then you could use them. It was the kind of thing you used if you were having to pick up rubber cement. I don't think anybody uses rubber cement anymore. God, I hope not. But we used to call it rubber cement pickups. You put rubber cement down, and then you sort of splash it all over the place, and then you put rubber cement on one side of something, rubber cement on your side, and then you let them dry, and then put them together. They're together forever, baby. You'd never get those apart. And then you'd get your rubber cement pickup, which looked like a piece of gum sole, and you take it off and get rid of all the other rubber cement around it. Oh yeah, rubber cement. Another thing to get high on because the base was acetone. Oh man, ooh, it's like ooh. Too much rubber cement. Yeah, I don't miss those days at all. Oh, that was terrible stuff. So he's out on the back lot asking questions, and somebody says, you should go down to the Florida. So he goes down to Florida. And there he finds the father, I think. That's right, he finds the father. And so the mother has taken over. I guess the mother has taken over the studio. I don't remember what's happened. And the father is living in this sort of, kind of a more like a shack kind of beach house. And they're living this sort of a life of ease. I mean, the father is not interested. He's just fishing. And apparently he's just fishing. And he has this beautiful girlfriend who is a little bit older. And she's kind of a hippie. She's got this long hair and she is quite mature looking. I mean, she probably was in her mid-30s at the time, maybe. That's what it looks like, is my memory. Now, I have to say that in itself was something else. The idea that women weren't all 18 and about to sort of, fall down on the ground with their legs open for men. This was also part of the second wave feminism. So this was a thing. And which is part of this. And she's a very strong character. I mean, she's a no bullshit kind of character. She knows what she's about and so on. So the girl has come down, Melanie Griffith has come down. And she comes on to Harry. She comes on to everybody. I mean, she's a kid, right? So she's just trying to manipulate people. She doesn't get enough attention. And, it's sort of a typical, poor little rich girl kind of thing. And he sees that and he's like, okay, he's supposed to bring her home. So he sort of has a little flirtation with the girlfriend that is the father's girlfriend, who is smart, obviously. And they have a very interesting series of conversations about truth and history, basically. So this is where the title of the movie comes from, because he's, as Chandler's Marlowe would. It's at night, and he's brought his traveling chess set and he sets it up and he's playing out a fixed problem. If you don't have somebody to play chess with, what you can do is set up a problem that nobody has solved, or that there are thousands of these, hundreds of thousands of these by now, chess problems, and they'll say, so you set out the board according to a diagram, and it'll say, white to play and mate in 3 moves, and you're like, so you stare at it, and you're like, what is white supposed to do? So you have to get into the head of white, and you have to get in the head of black and figure out. And so one of the ways of playing chess, basically, if you don't have another partner, if you don't have a partner, is to work on chess problems, because they're sort of like crossword puzzle problems, same kind of thing. So we set this up, and every chess problem usually most chess problems have a story that goes with them, because there are some famous problems, like Paul Morphy, who was a Russian famous, was he Russian or was he Hungarian? Sorry, I don't know this. Was a Russian chess champ in the 20s, I think. Extremely, extremely bright player. I mean, these guys were all very bright, and there were games that they missed, like they accepted a draw because nobody could see a way out, but it turns out there was a win in there, and that kind of thing. So it can be very interesting. So he's got the game set up, and she's walking outside, and she looks in through the screen porch and sees him playing, and he says, she says, what happened? And he says, well, and he says the specific game that this problem came from, and he says, and it's night, right? So, she says, so what happened? He says, well, it's a very rare situation. There were a series of moves that the grandmaster should have made, and he says, look, and so he makes the moves, and they're knight moves, right? So the knight, which is this unusual character in chess. I mean, there are rare. I cannot think of another game that I know well that has a character that moves as eccentrically, literally, as a knight does. And it's the thing about chess, is that there's all this sort of predictability, and things run in columns or diagonals and so on, except for the knight. And the knight is such a strange piece, because, as you know, it can go 1 over and 2 up, or 2 up and 1 over, or 2 over and 1 up, but basically it makes a little L. And it's such a curious move. And in Alice in Wonderland, or Alice Through the Looking Glass, pardon me, which is the one about chess, Alice meets the White Knight, and the White Knight is supposed to be Lewis Carroll. And so they go for a couple of steps, and he always falls off his horse. So that's the joke, right? Because he's a knight. And she has to get him back up on his horse. And then and he falls off the horse on the other side. It's like, because that's what the knight does. So the knight's like, because the knight's supposed to be leaping. I think that's the story. In fact, in German, my memory is that the character of the knight is named Springer, jumper, basically. And that's the thing, because the knight moves eccentrically. So, but if you're at the end of a game and you have 2 knights, and there's 2 kings, like let's say you're white and you have your king, obviously, and 2 knights, and the other person has the king only, it is very, very hard to bring a mate. And you usually can bring a mate only if the person screws up. With 2 bishops, not a problem. You can do it. 2 rooks, that's easy. I mean, it takes like a couple of moves. But 2 knights, oh baby, you're probably looking at a perpetual draw. You're looking at a draw, because you can always put the person in check, and they can always step out of it, because you have to get the knights lined up so that they cover all the spaces. So it's one of these interesting, lovely little metaphors, basically, about how unpredictable things are. So he says, move this, and you move that, and checkmate. And she says, oh, that's a beauty. So she knows chess. Okay, so this is one of these things where it isn't just the men who know, but the women do too. So, and she stands there and she says, show me again, so, and he says, yeah, and he puts the pieces back, and he says, he did this, checkmate. She says, it's a beauty. And he says, yeah, but he missed it. So there's this fantastic little play about the play of the play, basically, that inside the game of the narrative, which is, about the main character, and his failing relationship with his wife, is this next narrative about the inner story, apparently, about the child who's run away from the broken home because of there's too much wealth, and because the woman is putting in wealth instead of emotion. What the Melanie Griffith character needs is love. Obviously, it's an old story, and what she's getting is money. So she doesn't know how to behave, and she runs all over the place looking for attention. If she can't get love, at least attention from men who she can get attention from, because she's 16 and she's a sexual prize. So, and that's how she's learned to behave. So there's that story, and then there's the story of the two knights. But the point about it is that it misses. That's the point. Is that here's this unusual fix, but then the person who was this genius missed it. Okay, so this is the operating metaphor for the whole film, and so the film is even smarter than that, because it's called Night Moves, right? Because it's not K-N-I-G-H-T, night as in the piece night, but night, because the moves that happen at night. The things that happen at night. The most important things that happen in the text happen at night. Now, remember, it is a noir story. That is, typically the film noir, they actually were dark, typically it rained, because the pathetic fallacy was that the reason it was raining is it was raining in everybody's soul. Nobody's happy, and so on. Very often at the end of films like that, you'll see suddenly the weather clears. The most memorable or clearest example I can think of is The Pelican Brief, which was not a great film with Julia Roberts, but Sam Shepard in it. Sam Shepard, great actor. And a bright guy, playwright, poet, novelist. God, he was talented. Jesus. Fool for Love, if you can see Fool for Love. Oh, Dean Stanton was amazing. Oh, wow. Okay. But in A Pelican Brief, Darby Shaw, which I think was an early John Grisham book, she figures out a problem, and then she gets killed. And he has to go back and figure out what happened. So the whole film is the other way around. Sorry, she doesn't get killed. No, she survives. Sorry. For all you Julia Roberts fans, I'm sorry. I guess that's my wish. My wish is that she got killed and he survived, but actually he gets killed. Oh my God, Sam Shepard gets killed. Oh, it's a new disaster. Oh, it's a new trauma. I just remembered. It's Sam Shepard who gets killed. Oh, that's terrible. He's on screen for about 10 minutes and then boom. So, they focus on the car. You're like, oh, you just know there's going to be a car bomb. You're like, yeah. So I sit there in the theater going, kaboom. And my friends are like, fine, and 2 minutes later, boom. And everybody's like, who's that fucking asshole up there? And that's what they really say, too. I'm not censoring them. I know when my time is to leave. I'll leave now before I get beaten to a pulp. Don't break my glasses. You can beat me up, but don't break my glasses. Insurance won't pay unless I'm. Wait, I just got them replaced because I was. Anyway, so yeah, Pelican Brief. So he gets killed. He's her mentor. So then she has to figure out what happened. So she goes back and she figures out the crime. She figures out, what of course it's a conspiracy. It goes up to the highest levels. And the whole film is shot, and she looks like she's dead through the whole film because she's so stricken by this loss, the Sam Shepard character, and how much he meant to her, and so on. So she looks like she's a corpse for the whole movie. And the film is shot in blue. They put a blue-green cast over the over the text. Now that probably was a filter that they laid on post-production, which was probably an early digital filter. I'm guessing it was an early special effects done in post-production. But anyway, okay, so then she solves the problem. And the very last shot or something like that, she's like in the Bahamas. And it's sunny and warm and everything. And you're like, Jesus, finally. Because the whole film is like, oh, you're sitting there. didn't help that it was in the middle of the winter when the thing came out. Anyway, so there's this pathetic fallacy is ongoing with mystery films, and that's why it's a noir film. So everything that's important in this movie happens at night. Well, okay, so the night moves are not the moves that happen on the chessboard, but the moves that happen when it's night, and basically you can't sleep. They're all insomniacs. So the girl goes on the run at night. He comes back to get her. So she takes they run charters, and so he takes the girlfriend, whose name I cannot remember. I am sorry, I can't remember his name either. I think it's Harry, but Harry is also the name of the character in the conversation, so I may be wrong about that. She takes them out on a tour, on a cruise, basically, because they do night. They have a glass bottom boat and they do night fishing, and so the girl wants to go swimming at night, and so fine. So she gets out, and she's wearing nothing, and this was sort of that's why it was restricted. So she's swimming around. Melanie Griffith swims around. You just see her butt, and but she comes up and gives him the finger, and the girlfriend says, the rare South Floridian fingerfish. And he's like, oh, I wondered. So it's very well done. And as I say, they're adults, and he sees that the kid is troubled, and she tries to basically, lure him, and he's like, no, he's an adult, he's not doing that. That's not what he does. You're a child, I'm not doing that to you, and I like you. So he takes her back to L.A. Okay, then she gets killed, and then he really wants to know what has happened. What did he do? Because he brought her back to LA, and then what happened? So then he has to really dig in. And so even though he's not being paid anymore, because of course the mother fires him at that point, he starts to dig, and he digs. And as usual, it's not pretty what he finds out. And he turns up everybody's sort of little story, and he turns up, the piece of story about this and the piece of story about that. And as usual, it's a series of overlapping narratives. And I think this is one of the things that Raymond Chandler and then Ross Macdonald, although I was never a Ross Macdonald fan, but if you know the Harper books, they make good Harper movies. I mean, I was just not a fan. And Harper played a couple of times by Paul Newman, who also did a really good job, I think, in those roles. Those were good movies, actually. Harper, and then there was another Harper movie after that, and then there was a third one called The Drowning Pool, which was not my favorite of them, but I'd see Harper, the first movie. Also, while I'm thinking about Paul Newman, who really was a very fine actor all his life, you might see WUSA. Man, nobody sees that thing anymore, but talk about a scathing take on the media. Whew, boy. So many radio stations, AM radio stations in the United States begin W, right? WKRP Cincinnati was the name of a show. So WUSA is the name of this movie. I have no idea whether it's available. You might be able to find a stream of it. It's black and white. Well, I'm not sure about that. And actually maybe in color. Our television was black and white. It's like that Calvin and Hobbes discussion in Calvin and the Father about, he says, how come old pictures are in black and white? And the father says, well, because there was no color in the world then. And Calvin says, really? He says, yeah. He says, well, then, well, how come there's color later? It's like, well, because there was, when Kodachrome came along, there was color in the world. And he's like, oh, it's just wonderful. You gotta love it. Oh, I love the way that the father just is complete, has no compunction about completely messing with Calvin's head. I'm like, Anyway, so he begins to dig around. And at the same time, you come to see that his relationship with his wife is maybe the main thing. She's had an affair. They sort of have an open marriage, but it's not working. And so she's had an affair. He doesn't like the guy. So in this beach house, I'm coming back to that. You thought I forgot about the beach house. I did not. There are these sliding glass doors, which of course look out onto the beautiful beach. And on the beach house, one of the glass doors is one of these. I don't know if people put these on their glass anymore, but they're sort of they're magnifiers basically. So you can look out, and it makes a sort of fisheye lens of the world. It just sort of was one of those flaky things, kind of like lava lamps. But the thing is that when you look through it, of course, your perspective is entirely changed. And so it's very much another one of these images that is crucial to understanding the movie, that basically he has to step back. He's got to change his perspective of how he sees the wife and how he understands her and how she understands him and so on. And so there are these wonderful lines. Or at one point, he's discussing this back in the early part of the discussion when he's in Florida, talking with a girlfriend, and she says to him, "Where were you when Kennedy was killed?" And he says, "Which Kennedy?" And she says, "Any Kennedy." It's like, oh, fantastic. And this is very much because it's such a good commentary on what had become of the hippies, what had become of the free love movement and the anti-war movement, say by the mid-70s, which had been completely shredded by corporatism, by the end of the war and the cynicism around it, by Nixon and Watergate, the betrayal, basically, which we now sort of seem to think is just normal business, which at the time was considered to be a serious breach of the public trust. When Nixon had his people bug the Watergate Hotel, which was a Democratic meeting point, stronghold for the Democratic National Committee. It was a committee to re-elect committee to elect a president, and by his so-called plumbers, who included CIA operatives and so on. So it was corrupt, and that corruption, it just killed everything. I mean, that's sort of the sense of like, oh my God, what have we come to? Well, in the mid '60s, people said, where were you when Kennedy was killed? And everybody remembered or purported to remember where they were exactly when Kennedy was killed, which is the same thing as asking a generation. Probably you could ask anybody, let's see now, 30 or older, where they were on 9/11, and they would remember, because people have these particular memories. Now, I was talking about this yesterday, when I was talking about Young Men and Fire, how unreliable these are, sometimes called flashbulb memories, because they go off like a flash, and you have a specific static shot of what happened. You're like, I know exactly what happened. This was there, and this, and I saw this, and as we saw yesterday, sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And so, like the can of potatoes is exactly there, and it has been opened. It is that can of potatoes. And he put it back down, and it's been undisturbed, for whatever, 30 years at that point. But other things we completely get wrong. So what we've learned about flashbulb memories is they're absolutely unreliable. But we have very vivid memories, very vivid flashbulb memories. People remember people who weren't there, and they remember things that happened, remember the time of day it was, but it couldn't have been, that kind of thing. So, so this sort of was a commonplace to say, where were you when Kennedy was killed? But Harry, I think his name is Harry, is like, no, he's older and more jaded than that. He says, which Kennedy? So was it John or Bobby? Because Bobby was killed in 1968, and that was the end of the end, right? That was the beginning of the end, really, because then Tet, and the killing of Martin Luther King, the killing of Malcolm X in '69, the death of a generation, basically, of rebels, of people who could be rebels. It's not that the Kennedy boys were, the real freedom fighters that they've been made out to be, but at least they weren't the racists that Governor Wallace and Strom Thurmond and the people who were in the South who died in the wall, KKK members and racists. I mean, so this was the better part of the world, but they were killed, right? And as they were killed, basically, the young people and people who came back from Vietnam felt that they had been betrayed, quite rightly so, I think, by by all kinds of forces in the world, or misunderstood that they they thought Americans were good, and then they were like, well, wait a second, who's making napalm? Dow Chemical, they're making napalm. Who else? Oh, Monsanto is making napalm. Now people are like, Monsanto, it's like they've been bad for a long time. What's your definition of good? Well, they wouldn't. American industry wouldn't act against the public good. Oh, they wouldn't. What about American pharmacare? Which is why it's such an important thing right at the moment to have the WHO and the UN, because it's really a human rights issue, take up the issue of who should Should there be a pool developing a vaccine for the world? Or should somebody be allowed to own it? It's like, no, somebody should not be allowed to own it any more than somebody should be allowed to own the idea of literacy. It's like, no, this is not how we behave. Anyway, so let's get started about how much the pharmacare will stand to lose. It's like they're going to make plenty. Nobody's going to stop taking drugs anytime soon. Pharmacare will always be making money. But this is okay. So basically, what Harry sees is the breaking of this trust, and the breaking of the trust goes right down into every single relationship, right down to what happens to the 16-year-old, because she was betrayed basically by the adults around her who should have known better and should have treated her better, but didn't. They took advantage. And so that's abuse. It's like, well, there's all kinds of abuse going on, and that doesn't mean that what happened to her is right. It means that abuse is abuse, and it's got to stop. Okay. So this is an amazing movie, and it does have a happy ending, an opening, I think a reasonable happy ending. I mean, it's not a Hollywood happy ending at all, but things are on a mend, and I think this is one of the reasons why this particular narrative is so like the Chandler stories, is that there's a general direction upwards, but it's not a comedy. It's not a bunch of yucks. It's going to be work. But if they're prepared to do the work, then that, of course, is all you can do. And that's the deal that we have to make as adults. You have to be prepared to do the work. Okay, well, we can do that.